by the time we get to the deadline, which of those big names are playing for the Lakers?
I mean, they always seem to be in on it. The DeJounte Murray stuff is really interesting. He seems to be somebody that, like, they definitely want. It's just tough. Like, them and the Miami Heat are just always the two teams that are like, well, we're interested. But I think that, it seems like the Lakers want to be able to get DeJounte Murray. I think that the market is kind of showing that there isn't like a huge demand for DeJounte Murray. I think the biggest issue for the Lakers is going to be finding a third team to probably facilitate where D'Angelo Russell goes, because that contract's bad. People do not want him on their team for whatever reason. A lot of it's on court, but I think that's going to be the toughest part. So if I had to guess on like a player that maybe gets moved to them, I think DeJounte is definitely a fun one, at least to consider, and how that fit would go with LeBron and AD.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's these teams all want to be in on this, but this is what I call sports radio trades, where everybody says, and I did a lot of this in D.C. for years, with people calling in. They're like, well, if the Redskins just went out and traded for this guy, it's like, okay, yeah, but how do you actually make that work? Oh, it's funny, Joe, when you think about it, the Heat we always talk about, that, like, not having assets or the cap space, and they still find ways to make these trades, which just is another example of how well run that organization is. Still got a couple of minutes left here. Are there some other teams that you look at and say they probably will be active at the deadline? Like, I feel like it doesn't feel like the Knicks, my Knicks, and I know you've got the Knicks right atop of that, atop that Twitter banner with you too. I don't know. They're much more. I just feel different about the way this team is specifically. Like, they're very cautious with the moves they're making. Everything feels very calculated, as opposed to, we got to go get somebody and we got to do it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's smart, right? And I think that, like, as much as like Stephen A. Smith wants to just yell into like the abyss, right, about how the Knicks need to do things, like it's just like, I think they're actually being run properly right now. They're not like making crazy trades. They're not trading for guys that they think they can get in free agency. And now New York is like potentially a destination for some teams, like, or for some guys rather, right? So, in the buyout market, it sounds like Kyle Lowry probably will get bought out by the Charlotte Hornets. Teams he's looking at are like the Lakers, the Knicks, the Sixers, amongst the other teams. So like, those are some of the options for him. But the Knicks are definitely in a situation where they can kind of get some guys in the buyout market. I think some of the teams that I would expect to be extremely active, Milwaukee definitely wants some more perimeter defense. And I think that Philadelphia needs to get another guy. Like, they need another facilitator to some degree. I don't know if that's like a Brogdon. I don't know if that's a Lowry. But I think they need somebody else, because the minutes where Maxey and Embiid like aren't on the court can kind of get bogged down a bit. So I wouldn't be surprised to see either of them making a move. I think that Miles Bridges is probably another guy who does get moved at the deadline. It sounds like, Charlotte kind of bolstered his stock up, but it does seem like they're in a position where they want to kind of move on from people, trying to get some assets. So maybe he's somebody that I would look for.
Obviously, the big story, the big thing we're watching is Deebo Samuel's health this weekend, Sterling. What have you been hearing out there? Do we know whether or not he's maybe leaning more towards playing, not playing, or have they just been completely hush-hush about the whole thing?
Well, first off, thanks for having me on, guys. And Deebo Samuel, I'll tell you right now, while the reports say he's 50-50 and the Niners have been hush-hush on whether his shoulder is healthy enough to play on Sunday, I would like to think him rehabbing after the Packers game this past Saturday, there's a good chance I think Deebo Samuel suits up this Sunday.
A lot was made over Brock Purdy's performance against Green Bay when Deebo Samuel went out. Some of that criticism I found to be justified. Others I didn't. How would you assess his play from what you saw on Saturday?
Well, it was pretty bad for 3.5 quarters, right? About until, 6 minutes left in the fourth. Every Niner fan was on the edge of their seat thinking, is this game going to be over, and are we witnessing the collapse of Brock Purdy? Now, we know how the game ended. It's a little more sunshine and rainbows than it was on Saturday against Green Bay, but I do think one thing working in Brock Purdy's favor is the fact that there's going to be literally no rain this Sunday in the forecast in Santa Clara. On Christmas Day against the Ravens, we saw how awful and putrid he was against that defense in the rain. Against Green Bay, here comes the rain again. Doesn't look great either. In games where it is sunny outside, where it's daytime, 1 p.m. at Levi Stadium, maybe it's a 4 p.m. start somewhere else, Brock Purdy is averaging nearly 290 yards through the air and almost 2 touchdowns with less than half a turnover. I would highly expect, after a bad game against Green Bay, Brock Purdy should be able to turn things around against a pretty shoddy Lions secondary.
Being the fan of a team and having covered a team for many years that couldn't figure out their quarterback situation in Washington and still hasn't, you're in a really good spot with Josh Allen as your quarterback.
I'll take me some Josh Allen.
You're in a good spot with Sean McDermott as your coach. But if they did refresh the coaching staff, I would be okay with that. And the reason why I say that is because sometimes coaches lose a locker room. Guys have already heard everything enough. The play calling has gotten stale. Guys' roles have kind of just been maximized to where that coach's knowledge maybe is. Like I always use the example of Mark Jackson, right? Mark Jackson got the Warriors to 47 wins, and they fired him. They hired Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr won a bunch of titles there. Like he was able to take everybody that was there, and he could see some players that didn't fit their role, like a David Lee, took him out of the starting lineup, started Draymond Green, everything changed. If you're the Bills, I promise you it's not going to get better than Josh Allen unless you're drafting Caleb Williams, and even then, you don't know what Caleb Williams is going to be. You know what Josh Allen is. If you want to change coaches, maybe. If you want to have some tweaks, yeah. It's going to get expensive. They need to be able to draft better, and they've got to get Josh Allen back to where he was under Brian Dable when he was the offensive coordinator. And it shows you more and more how many times we've seen this. Look at the Eagles. The coordinators matter just as much, and in some cases, maybe even more than the head coach.
There were some people that were thinking that maybe he has lost the locker room. He has not. He has said some wild things in the locker room, and they kept winning football games. So, he has not lost the locker room in any sense, but they need to adjust, I think, the skill position guys. I'm a huge fan of Stephon Diggs, and I think for this period in Buffalo Bills football, Stephon Diggs was what they needed. But moving forward, I'm not sure that they need that kind of guy anymore. In fact, my major priority, if I was Brandon Beane, I am signing T. Higgins. T. Higgins is not a superstar wide receiver, but he is in the echelon of a really damn good one. And I think if you're Buffalo, you need to build your roster with your superstar, which is Josh Allen, and then a lot of really damn good guys around him and less superstars. I think the more options that you have, because it always felt like it was Stephon Diggs and then a big step back and it was Gabe Davis, and they didn't have a run game. Well, Gabe Davis didn't play this weekend. They had a run game, kind of abandoned it in the second half, but they had a run game going on. But Stephon Diggs towards the end of the season was not your regular Stephon Diggs. And we know this entire offseason, he did not seem to be thrilled that he was in Buffalo. I think you need to assess that relationship and decide, do we want to move forward with this guy? You go sign T. Higgins, and then you get another quality wide receiver to go with him. The more quality options you have with a guy like Josh Allen, you're going to put him in a better spot because the less he's going to have to go Superman. And for the first 3.5 quarters, Nick, it felt like they figured that out. And then Josh Allen tried just a little too much to go Superman. He tried to go Superman to Stephon Diggs with a perfectly placed ball. A perfectly placed ball, and they weren't able to come down with it, and it felt like at that point they were off the rails.